Welcome to One Move at a Time, the US Chess podcast where we highlight individuals and organizations advancing our mission to empower people, enrich lives, and enhance communities through chess. So this is the One Move at a Time podcast. I'm your host, Brian Tillis, and I have another fantastic guest here today. I have the Iron Man of chess, Jay Bonin. And Jay, I am a big fan for a number of reasons, but I think you are not the record breaker for the most active U.S. chess member. If not all time, you're definitely on the top list. So how many tournaments would you say you played? Because when I look at the member service area, it only goes back to about 91.
Yeah, and I guess from there it was a little over 4,000, but I go back to 1972, and back in those days, that everything was done by hand, and I played in a lot of Bill Goichberg tournaments, but I don't think he has any of those wall charts, and I played some of my tournaments at the Marshall Chess Club, but who's to say what kind of records they're keeping and what happened to them? And that's always like a gaping hole. I can't really gauge exactly how many tournaments I played in, how many games. I could only estimate, and it really sucks,
Well, we might be able to help at US Chess In. We've got some connections with folks to see if we can't dig up some old records at the office as well. Even though we've moved a few times, we've still kept our records intact, so I can see what I can do with that.
Yeah, I see you're wearing a US Chess t-shirt, so I guess you work for them.
I do. I'm the communications and marketing director, so
awesome.
I do a little bit of work.
Yeah, nice. Well, I'm sure maybe you could fish things out a bit, but they have everything since 1991, so that's for starters, and I guess by now over 4,000 tournaments. There's a lot of homework. It's not just how many tournament games I played. I sometimes ask myself, how many tournaments have I won? That would be a good homework assignment for the curious out there.
So I'm going to leave that to people in the comments as well, because I think there are quite a number of statistics that's involved with your career. So tell me, how did you get your introduction to chess, and what is it about the game that has captivated you for so long?
Well, I was in junior high school in 1970, and I was in homeroom class at the beginning of the day, and a couple of my classmates were playing chess on a little tiny wooden pegboard, and that's initially what started it all. And I got curious. I really was curious. I even offered to play a game, even though I didn't know the rules. I played some illegal moves and waited for my classmate to correct me and all that. But eventually I went out to my neighborhood toy store and bought a little Hasbro chess set, and it had the instructions on how to move all the pieces, and I taught myself how to play. And this is back in 1970, and of course, fast forward to 1972, when Bobby Fischer was playing that match with Boris Spassky and, making history all over the place. I was working as a camp counselor in a day camp in Brooklyn, Manhattan Beach Jewish Center, and I was on a break. I was in the counselor's lounge, and the TV was on, and lo and behold, Shelby Lyman was analyzing the match, and then it really hit me. And right after that moment, I just wanted to play, so I started looking for places to play. At that time, I had no idea that chess tournaments even existed, and I ended up playing with various people around different neighborhoods, and I eventually, started traveling looking for clubs to play, and I stumbled across a famous place, the Chess and Checker Club of New York, and this was back in July of '72, and I went there a few times, and eventually I moved on to another place, Charles Hidalgo's Chess House, which was on 72nd Street between Broadway and Columbus Avenue in Manhattan. I played there for a bit. But all in all, I didn't know about tournaments. I didn't know about the Marshall Chess Club. I eventually found out when I played in a high school match. I was playing for James Madison High School, and my opponent played for Sheepshead Bay High School, and he was a member of the Marshall Chess Club, and he was pretty damn good. He was like a 1700 player, and at that time, 1700s were like God to me. And he beat me up pretty good, but then he told me about the Marshall Chess Club and that, where it is and stuff. So in November of 1972, I went out into Manhattan to visit the Marshall, and it was a nice reception. The first person I met was none other than Bruce Pandolfini. He was a teacher. He was giving a lesson, and he buzzed me in, and and I still talk about that to Bruce every time I see him. It's like, look what you let in, and all that, and so he buzzed me in, and I met a very nice man, manager. His name was Bill Slater, and he was very nice to me. So I got a very good reception. I ended up joining the club, but still, I didn't know about tournaments. I eventually found out about tournaments. I found out about Bill Goichberg, and he ran a big scholastic tournament at the Hotel McAlpin. At that time, the Hotel McAlpin was the place of many Bill Goichberg events, and every couple of weeks. And I entered my very first tournament. My faculty advisor in high school advised me that I should play in the novice section, and boy, was it a good decision. I ended up tying for first. Who's to say what would have happened if I played in the open section, which incidentally was won by Michael Rode, and I was in a 7-way tie in the novice section. So I scored 7 out of 8, 1 loss, and so that got me going.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in all of these games, and I mean, a rough estimation, probably 30,000 tournament games.
I probably played close to 40,000 games.
Okay.
That's a rough estimate.
All right.
Like I said, I can only guess. I could take all the games from 1991 on, and then I could add those, 19 years beforehand, and just sort of estimate. I mean, I wasn't very active. I became active in 1980 when Bill Goichberg opened up the Chess Center of New York. That was a gaming house on 6th Avenue and West 14th Street. And he ran tournaments there every day, and that's really what got me going. That's what started my legacy. And, he had the place from 1980 to 1984. Then after 1984, the action moved to the Manhattan Chess Club. Steve Emmett was Bill's right-hand man, and he decided to keep it going, and he aptly called his tournaments Chess Center of New York tournaments to keep the tradition of the place going. And he did that for a long time, and a lot of my tournaments were at the Manhattan Club, and then later the Marshall, and Steve ran them, and I still continued to play in Bill Goichberg tournaments, and been doing so ever since. I'm sorry that Bill is no longer involved because he has health issues and stuff, and you know, it would really be a big loss. You know,
So, if you had to put your finger on a single game that you've played as your favorite, do you have a game in mind?
well, my apparently some people are saying that my so-called Mona Lisa of chess game that would be against Grandmaster Stefan Duric, who I played in 1986 at the World Open, and I brought out my towel imitation. I sacrificed pieces. I even had a quiet move thrown in, and I was really proud of the game. But I have a few favorites, and they're in my book, Active Pieces. I have a nice game against Tatiana Weiserberg in the an old Marshall Chess Club championship back in 2007, I believe, and I won a brilliancy prize for that game. And you know, I have some others. A nice clean win against Lev Albert, and there's Irina Crush. That's in the book. A whole bunch of them, but and I have some landmark games like beating Sammy Reshevsky in 1982 on my 27th birthday.
That's a good birthday
It was
present.
it was in a tournament at the Chess Center, and it was a rescheduled game because it was Shabbos, and Sammy followed Shabbos, so he wanted to reschedule the game, and I volunteered to play him at an earlier date, and it just happened to be on my birthday, and he was my first Grandmaster scout on my birthday. You can't make this up.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I went through quite a number of games. As in addition to our interview, I'm going to be doing analysis and adding it to the interview a number of great games, and of course plugging your book. But one game that really stuck out to me, it was the '91 U.S. Open, a win against Dzindzichashvili.
Oh, 91 or 90? I think it was 1990.
Okay, my date might be wrong, but it was a Benoni game, and it was just absolutely clinical.
Yeah, I remember that game sort of. He voluntarily doubled his pawns with a bishop f5 move, and then he later put his knight on e4, and I moved my knight away to e2, and I ended up getting a dominating knight on f5 in that game. Yeah, that stood out pretty good. Yeah, I actually beat Gingy 6 times.
Wow.
As great a player as he is, I've done good things against several grandmasters. I have 6 wins against Gingy, 6 wins against Dmitry Gurevich, many wins against Michael Rode, although, we played over 400 times and he's still ahead, but I kind of caught up as I got better. He dominated me early when we were kids. And against Walter Brown, I have 4 games and 4 draws. So
not too bad.
Never lost a game to Mr. 6-time. I'm also undefeated against Reshevsky. I have 1 win and 2 draws against him. So, yeah, I got a few things to brag about, I guess. But despite all that, I'm not a grandmaster because I never earned the norms. Somehow that eluded me. Even though I have many scalps, I just couldn't put them all together at the right time to earn that GM title. And now it's even harder because of the rating requirement. And my FIDE rating is real low. I'm only 2100. So if I ever make a GM norm, I'm going to have to figure out how to gain almost 400 rating points on top of that. I mean, when I earned my IM title in 1985, that wasn't a problem. I made my 3 norms and I got my title. Simple. Why shouldn't it stay that way?
Oh, it's the landscape of FIDE ratings have dramatically changed with the lowering of the base rating and so many fantastic young players entering the
Yeah, I
rating
guess
system.
there's just too many of them.
Yeah. Mass deflation, I would say, because they're so talented. They'll be 2,200 U.S. chess and then 1,700 FIDE, and they'll take it out of you.
There's a 4-year-old Indian boy with a rating of 1,500. I think his name is Anish Sarkar or something.
I've definitely seen that, yeah.
That is amazing. I mean, I didn't learn how to play until I was 14, but yet you could learn and be cognitive of the game at the tender age of 3.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I didn't start competing competitively until I was 15, so I get it. It's just amazing.
So we're both late bloomers, yeah.
So you took us to about the 80s, and I want to fast forward to 1997 because I feel like this was a big year for you.
That was a standout year for me.
So tell us about that year.
Yeah, I play locally, and in addition to visiting the Marshall and Manhattan Chess Club, there were 2 other clubs that I frequented. There was the Queen's Chess Club, which I still go to, and the Nassau Chess Club, which I still go to. But, the Queen's Club I frequent most Fridays. The Nassau Club, not as much as I used to. They meet on Mondays, and I usually like to alternate between their tournaments and the Marshall FIDE Monday tournaments, so I go back and forth. But that year, that was a standout year because I did something that will probably never be duplicated. I won the club championships of all 4 clubs in the same calendar year. But not only that, I also won the New York State Championship. So that was a year to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was looking at the stats, that definitely stuck out to me. 97 being the year.
Yeah, I mean, all in the same year. I mean, I don't know if that's ever going to be done again. It's kind of hard to find 4 different places to play and do it often. But somehow I did it. I guess I had the desire, and.
So you've had many prestigious tournaments that you played in: U.S. Championships, New York Masters.
Yeah, the U.S. Championship was interesting. I was invited that year in 2007 as a wild card, and that same year the late Walter Brown was also a wild card, which is kind of ironic because Walter Brown won the U.S. Championship 6 times, but here he was a wild card. I guess he was past his prime and going down. I actually got to play him in that tournament, and that was one of our 4 draws. I believe that was the very final game I played against him. Yeah. And, so that was a great opportunity, the U.S. Championship. And I always look forward to the New York State Championship. I've won that or tied 4 times. The first one being in 1982, and in that tournament I beat future Grandmaster Dmitry Gurevich. So that stands out, and also beating Larry Christensen in the last round of the 1976 Pan American Intercollegiate. That kind of stands out because that was the tournament that put my rating over 2,200. So I always think about that. And, I always think about my first scalps in various rating classes. Like in 1974, I beat my first A player, Matthew Looks. And I beat my first master in November of 1975. That was the late Bill Hook. That was in a tournament at the McAlpin Hotel. And my first senior master was Larry Christensen. And Yeah, so those kind of stand out, you know.
So, in terms of looking over the course of your career, and I have looked at a few of your games that have recently happened at the Marshall where you're having to do battle with this generation that's coming up.
Yeah, that's always the challenge. I'm basically the gatekeeper. I'm fighting against all these young players. I'm a minority now. I used to be the majority, but now this is a game for kids, and I find myself in a perpetual battle to hold back the progress of many talented young players out there. Some of who are going to become grandmasters, and I guess I take delight for every win I have against these youngsters because you know, I mean, I'm getting up there in age. I'm going to be 70 in July, and you know, I'm just happy to be able to, still play the game and keep these kids in check for as long as I can until I can't. Uh, you know,
And it's not just the kids either. I've seen, because I
that's right.
follow
The
your
adults are
posts.
pretty good too.
Yeah, even Title Tuesday, I'll follow your post about that when you're playing the
Oh
Title
yeah,
Tuesday
Title
events.
Tuesday. I get beaten up every time, but I keep coming back for more because I keep saying to myself, maybe I'll have an otherworldly result. And I actually did score 6.5 one time, and that was my personal best. And my biggest upset was against Nihal Sarin, an Indian who's over 3,000. So I'll take that to the bank. So there are things that I could do, but yeah, Title Tuesday is very speculative, and I pretty much get beaten up because blitz is not really the strongest part of my game. I mean, I've had a couple of good blitz results, but they're few and far between.
So, would you say your style has changed or evolved over the years? Because, I mean, you've gone through the pre computer age all the
Yeah, I
way
used to
to.
be more aggressive. I was in my younger years. I was playing sharp openings. I was opening with E4 a lot because I was inspired by Bobby Fischer and I wanted to copy him. And I was playing lines like the Velimirovich attack and the Kerry's attack against the Sicilian. Throw the kitchen sink. I made the mistake of doing that against the late Grandmaster Shamkovich, and I sacrificed two bishops, and it was an unsound sack, and he won the game. And at the end of the game, he said, "I had the two bishops." So he had a sense of humor there. So yep, that was me back in the day, back in the '70s, and then around 1981, I kind of started switching over to the queen pawn. You know, playing solid systems, a lot of bishop G5 stuff, and I still do that. And yeah, I would say I've kind of evolved into a more positional player, and I love to play for the end game, especially against young players. I always try to trade queens, and I don't even have to be in a good ending. I just have to be in an ending. Just get the queens off the board, and my opponent will self-destruct, and I'm usually right, but sometimes I'm wrong, you know, and I get humbled.
It stuck out when I was going through games. You had a number of, it was Nimzo Larson and Trumpowski games where you'd captured on F6. You
Yeah, I
play with
love
that
to
pawn
give my
structure
opponents
beautifully.
double pawns. I've been doing that a lot, and I've even found a new way to do it. I'll open with knight c3 on move one, and I'll sometimes transpose into a two knights defense where I'll bring my bishop out to b5, and my opponent will bring his bishop out to b4, and I'll chop the knight on f6, and I'll give double pawns that way. And so it's just another way to follow the Bonin playbook, as it were. Uh,
And that's the thing as a coach when I have students ask me, well, how do I get better at the middle game? You look at clinicians who really know what they're doing in certain pawn
yeah, just
structures.
read my book. That's all you need to know about playing the middle game and playing the ending. I mean, in my book, I got a lot of end games in my quiz section, and even throughout the book, I wouldn't say I'm Capablanca. I'm better looking. So.
And that book again is active pieces, and I'll definitely have a link below that. It's listed on Amazon.
Yeah, you could still get it on Amazon.
Yeah.
Although I've actually entertained the thought of ordering copies and trying to sell them personally, being that there's all these new players, and I mean.
So the potential of a signed copy is there, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, and it's still there. I still sign copies. I still talk people into ordering the book, and they'll come to me and I'll sign it, and yeah, I'm still doing that, and it almost didn't happen. My co-author Greg Keener, he wrote another book with my buddy Asa Hoffman, who inspired me a lot. I picked up a lot of my opening ideas from Asa, and I guess I would call Asa my de facto mentor, even though I didn't really have a coach. But he gave me some valuable advice. But the best advice is you always got to keep them guessing. And in this day and age, that's true, because part of playing the game is trying to surprise your opponent.
That's very fair, and I feel that because of the computer age, young students are so attached to the engine evaluation that more of a viewpoint like bluffing and poker when it comes to opening selection.
Yeah, I was a terrible poker player. I used to play poker a lot on the side, but I played it too much like chess, and it's not chess.
Oh, definitely not.
Because, people can read you. And I guess I was read like an easy book.
So with tournament preparation over the years, and especially mentioning the big 7-0 coming up, how does your tournament preparation differ now compared to, say, a few decades ago?
That's a good question, and I think the answer should be obvious, and that is, now you could look on the internet. I do a lot of studying on the internet. I'll play over games. I'll go on chess.com usually and play over games from the latest tournaments, or I'll go to chessgames.com, or I'll or ChessBase if I'm trying to prepare for an opponent. Like, I'll Google the name and I'll go to their ChessBase folder, because they usually have a selection of games, and that's how I prepare now. But in the good old days, I was sitting on a couch with a little peg chessboard and reading a copy of Chess Informant, and that's how I prepared back in those days. But I guess back then it was easier to be secretive, but now everybody could find out what you play and figure you out. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been told by players from your generation that they would go over to Europe, be able to use an idea over there for a few months, and then come back over here and use it before it would get published. Those days are definitely gone.
I remember the one European trip I took, and yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier. Back in 1987, I spent a whole summer, like a whole month in Switzerland. I played in 2 tournaments there, and then I went to England, and I killed a month over there. And I guess I didn't really plan the trip too well, and I ended up coming back. I was starting to get homesick, and I even quit my job to do that. That was kind of a risky decision. I really did some crazy things over the years, and but somehow after it's all done, I'm still here.
So in the conversation so far, you've mentioned many I would consider legends of chess. Do you have any modern players that you really enjoy their games and they stick out to you?
Well, I played over a few of Fabiano Caruana's games, and he kind of reminds me of Karpov. And I like his games. And see, I like Karpov's games himself. What other modern players? Ulf Anderson, Petrosian, positional guys. You know. But ironically, I enjoyed Tal's games too, even though it's really not my style. The guy was very courageous. You know.
Yeah, there was a game that you had with Shabalov that was a complete mess that you won. And I know you're not afraid to get into the scrap with people, even though you may define
Well, I mean,
as positional.
that's the thing. I mean, you got to adapt, I mean, I'm capable of attacking if given the opportunity. But against Shabalov, I remember one of the games, it was a Dutch, and, I think he castled queenside, and, I found a way to get to his king. I sacrificed material, and I got to his king, you know. I guess it was because I had to, because he was going after me. So I had to switch gears and go after him. It's not really the way how I wanted the game to go, but I guess if you're trying to win, you just have to adapt to the situation. That's most important. You know.
And as a final question, what legacy do you hope to leave in the chess community?
Well, I guess there probably won't be anyone like me because everybody has a life. So I don't think anybody's going to play as many games as I have because, like I said, life gets in the way, and but it's weird. Somehow that eluded me, but yet here I am still, and that really puzzles me. It's like, how did I get here? But yet here I am. But I've had people come to me and say that I inspire them, and I guess that's great. And that kind of makes me feel rich. You make a difference. And some people are active, but they'll have a lot of catching up to do, and so I guess that'll be my legacy. And
Well, I sincerely appreciate you taking the time for the interview today. I know the listeners are definitely going to enjoy it, and I've personally enjoyed the conversation, and can't say much more than I sincerely appreciate it.
well, it's my pleasure.
After going through decades of Jay's games, I picked out a few of my favorites that really showcase his style and stubbornness. So let's get started in the 90s with this absolute gem of a game in the Benoni against Roman Dzindzichashvili. And Jay has white in this game. We're going to quickly reach a Benoni setup. And already on move 6, I like this deviation by Jay from the main line. Typically, knight f3 is played here. And Benoni players are often looking for an opportunity to get rid of the c8 bishop, say via bishop g4, and trade for that knight on f3. But with this very nice practical move h3, it's already eliminating the possibility of this bishop having an ideal square in the future. So that's not going to do it for the bishop. And it takes this bishop essentially out of the game from the get-go. Now after castles, we have to ask with our development, what is the best square for our bishops and knight? And in this case, the knight is naturally going to f3, but this bishop, it's going to be most aggressively placed on d3. The last piece that we want to develop is the c1 bishop, because very often, once black accomplishes the e6 break, followed by e takes d5, the Benoni pawn, or d6 pawn, is going to be weak and will want that bishop to come to f4. It also gives us the ability, with this earlier move, h3, to drop our bishop back to h2 to continue to eye the weakness on d6, even in the event of moves like knight h5. So already we're starting to see the character of the position come together. White knows where his pieces are going, and he's not leaving room for his high-rated opponent to finesse him in the interesting Benoni position. So e6, black's going with a natural break, knight f3, and here I think Roman was trying to get off the beaten path, trick Jay a bit, but here likely best is to go with takes, check, bishop e3, bishop h6, and this topical line is something that the engine likes, but in practical games, black's been doing okay here, and this is something that is covered in a couple of chessable courses, including the Benoni Simplified. So coming back, knight a6, we're about to see a master class in handling the Benoni. So let's continue forward with solid simple play. First castles, and now black should likely, with hindsight of this game, look to change the character of the position with e5 and play it like a pseudo King's Indian, where I believe the optimal plan for white here is to go for a b4 break. Black played knight c7 in the game, and now as black has not captured on d5, really showcasing the d6 Benoni pawn, bishop g5 is played. And this is a subtle nod to the flexibility of the pawn structure. h6, don't want to trade the bishop in the open position. Bishop e3, just waiting. And both sides holding back any major changes to the pawn structure. Simple development, queen d2, putting pressure on h6. E takes d5. What's the best way to capture? Well, if we're attacking, we want to keep pieces, so taking with the knight is off the table, as well as could have some tactical problems there. Taking with the c-pawn is going to take away some of our control over the b5 square, which could be a break point for black in the future. So e takes d5, and after king h7 to hold the h6 pawn, how can we improve? Well, it's a question of where's the counterplay for black here? Is he playing on the king side? No, the center is locked. So that b5 break is going to be the main point of counterplay, and let's go ahead and take it away with a4. Now after knight a6, you may be able to get the b4 square, but I don't want you to take this bishop, and once the knight reaches b4, I don't want to just entomb my rook on a1, so let's go ahead and find a good square for the rook. So in the event of knight b4, we can drop back and we'll have good piece harmony. So rook a to e1, this is where the action is happening. Knight b4, bishop b1. Now, a risk is taken by black, but already from the engine's point of view, white is a pawn and a half in the green here. It's hard to find a constructive plan for black. This is very Karpovian. We're just taking away all of the ideas of the opponent. So first, let's capture here. And we've got a newly minted weakness on f5. Let's go ahead and start trying to go after it. Knight h4. After queen d7, relocation here, queen d1, with the idea at some point the queen is going to come over to the king side. But in the meantime, she's just watching all of these key squares. Knight e4. And finally, after many moves, we reach one of those ideal Benoni points for this bishop, eyeing the weak d6 pawn. Now, if black goes for knight takes c3, we've got this beautiful attacking position where both of our minor pieces and queen are swarming the wrecked kingside structure. black's not going to make it very long there. And after what was played in the game, bishop e5, takes. And we're looking at lifting the queen at some point, but we could run into tactics would say f4. So first, we will play f4 ourselves, which not only gains time by kicking the rook, but also takes away all of this potential. So now we grab, and queen h5. It's hard for black to do much here. Tries to trade to release some tension. Now, rook f1, no reason to allow another trade where the queen and queen would become active in the event of the trade. It's very hard for black to do anything about this weakness. So queen e7, knight takes f5. Now, what is the best way, most efficient way to continue here? All right, hopefully you're thinking tactics. Knight takes d6. One, this is going to be great for the ending because we've got the protected pass pawn looking to go. Two, it's trying to deflect the queen so we can play queen takes f7, hitting the rook and king. So rook e3. We're up material. What are you typically supposed to do when you're up material? Trade down is the answer by many, but I'm looking to simplify the win. So when I'm up material, I try to make trades that are going to take away counterplay from the opponent. And the most dangerous thing left on the board is the queen for the opponent. So being able to grab a pawn and make a trade is going to make our life much easier as we're playing this endgame now that we have two protected pass pawns. Rook e2. And it really is the endgame principle of we need reinforcements. So how fast is our pawns? Well, we've got a knight in the way if we try to push the f-pawn. The fastest pawn is the furthest pawn, the d5 pawn. Plus, this knight is controlling key squares of this pawn. So, rook d1, check. Got to protect the knight, and pass pawns must be pushed. Again, protect the knight, simplifying the win, getting rid of that knight in the meantime. And after king f1, there's no way to stop the d-pawn. The checks are over, and it is a clinical game by Jay in the Bonin. Next up, we're going to go forward a decade, and this is from one of Jay's many appearances in the World Open. And Jay again has white here, and we've got another aggressive opening by black in the Budapest Gambit, and we're going to have another model game by Jay with how to solidly improve and play against this opening. So d takes e5, knight g4, and this is a minor finesse in understanding development with the opening. Knight f3 versus bishop f4, which are the top two moves. If you go knight f3 after bishop c5, this bishop is hemmed in. If you go bishop f4 first, in the event of bishop c5, we'll be able to go e3 and the bishop is outside of the chain. So little things, but they do make a difference with basic development. So bishop f4, knight c6 was played in the game. More pressure to the e-pawn, so we defend it. Now bishop b4 check. Knight bd2. Different than knight c3, where we could get some double pawns and black could get a little bit of play there. Queen e7. And there's no way for white to hold on to the extra pawn. So we're looking to give it back, and in the meantime, just pick up time for our investment. So e3, we trade a set, bishop e2, castle, castle, knight g6. We don't want to allow for the knight to take here, and moves like bishop takes c7 are going to leave us in quite bad shape after d6, as where is our bishop going? So watch out for those. So simply bishop g3 is easy enough, and after bishop d6, takes. What we have here is a 4-3 on the king side and a 3 versus 4 on the queen side. So how are we going to move forward with our pawn structure? It's not a locked pawn structure, so the bishop is going to be the favorable piece, and we'll be looking to have pawns on the dark squares and try to force our opponent's pawns on the light squares to be targets in the future for the bishop. When tactics aren't available, we're looking to improve our minor pieces and the pawn structure to get what we want out of the position. So, mass pushes on the king side or center doesn't seem like it. We need to get our rooks and queen into the game. So first, rook c1, looking to support the push of this pawn, which could get to a dark square and potentially hold back the pawn structure. Queen e5 is played, just bothering our b2 pawn. So simply queen c2 with development, protecting the pawn, and freeing up an open file for our rook in the future. d6, knight f3, bothering the queen so that we're taking away options like bishop f5, for instance. Rook on the open file. And b6, a lovely move to stop play against the c5 break. And I would say this is where most people would begin to go wrong in the position for white, because they don't see the low-hanging fruit, the easy tactics, the just something to do. So what we talked about earlier, make the bishop stronger. What are our goals with the pawn structure? And why did black just play b6? It was about c5. Renew the threat. Puts a pawn on a dark square, looking to play against the pawn structure. And black should very much go for c5 here to try to stop us. But in turn, that weakens the pawn. We put pressure against it. And after takes, we've in the very least created a backwards pawn and have flexibility to play against it in the future. White just has the slightest of an edge. So after b4, bishop b7 was played in the main game. c5, after dc, bc. Black doesn't want to capture again because it's going to ruin the dynamic potential of the queenside pawn structure, and it's going to have some problems on the c file. So bishop e4, queen c3, keeping all of that tension on the c file. Now, if we're going to trade, I want to do it on my terms. If white captures the black rook, that's going to assist this rook in getting to an open file. So, g3. In the event that black decides to take this knight, we're taking away forward squares from that g6 knight and getting a luft for our king later. So, nice practical move here. Takes. Rook d8 and knight d4. Eyeing the potential under some circumstances for the knight to go to c6 with tactics. Black finally activates that knight. Got to watch out for potential tactics that black could have on the f3 square. cb. Forces cb. Otherwise the c7 pawn would hang. And we want that square anyway. And with this trade, we're comparing pieces. Rook is much better than its counterpart as we're hitting base pawns. Our knight is well posted, and our bishop is flexible in the position, covering key squares. So black's going to need to defend the weakness. So knight c6. Got some tension here. Don't want to take due to back rank problems. So f3 would be a strong consideration, but Jay decides to go with bishop f3, and after knight takes, bishop takes, has transitioned this game into a bishop in the open position versus knight, which was one of the reasons I really like this game, as it emphasizes in the open position how to play with this dynamic. So rook c6, flexible move saying, hey, I know you have the majority on the queen side with the A and B pawns, but they're not going anywhere. g6, what we want to see, more pawns on the same color as our bishop for later. a4, where's that knight going? And let's improve the bishop while holding back the pawn and keeping this knight honest and fixed, as being able to play rook c7. Also with this bishop just dancing in the middle of the board here, we can play moves like e4 to anchor it, and very often we will see the pressure on the f7 pawn mount, and in the very least it's going to keep at least one of black's pieces tied down so it can't be attacking. So excellent technique here. Rook d7 to defend that weakness, e4 anchoring the bishop. And now don't have anything super forcing at the moment, so when you have time, do that principle that Silman talks about in the complete in-game course. In the final chapter, the master chapter, Cat and Mouse, we're just going to do slow, steady, incremental improvements. If our opponent's stuck, sure, let's slowly improve. King g2, e5, getting a pawn on the opposite color of the bishop, but kicking this knight away. Now, finally, the fruit of all of the work in the position is here. Tactic arrives. Do you see it? Now we've got bishop takes f7, as king takes is met strongly by e6 with the fork. So knight d4. And you got work to do still. That's just a pawn, plenty of game left. Defend both weaknesses. Now rook d8. Get that bishop out of there and as far away as possible. So we're threatening rook f7. And now win up material, simplify the win. We've got this passed pawn, but no rush with trying to push the pawn, as it's easily stopped. Bishop c4, lovely move that says, I'm still eyeing the fact that you could get a passed pawn with this 2 versus 1. So I'm just going to stop it on the break square. King e7, f4, and after knight f5, black resigned, and that's a good place to do so, as white has all the time in the world here. There's no counterplay coming from the pawn majority on the queen side, and we can very easily improve the king, start marching the pawns, and with 2 connected passed pawns, they're just going to push through. So in our next decade, jumping forward another 10 years, I want to take you to this middle game position, because so far I've shown Jay as a clinical player that is just putting people away. This is a game with Grandmaster Shabalov, known for his tactical prowess as well as calculation. But Jay, in this game, has absolutely no fear, and I didn't want you to have the impression that Jay's always playing solidly. He will do what is called for in the position, and we see it in this game from Foxwoods. It is white to move here after bishop e6. So, if you're a pause your video type of person, definitely figure out what Jay went for. Your eyes should be honed in on the fact that black's queenside shelter in front of his king is relatively wrecked, and we're looking to get after the king as quickly as possible. So we begin action with rook takes a5, and now Queen a4, getting this activation and annoyingly bothering the knight. Looking to get to a6 as the king is pretty hemmed in, and we have some options to bring the rook over. But gets rid of one of the potential problems, so now the king could at least run this way, but we get a knight in turn. Bishop d6. Aggressive defense should definitely be expected. And we should have it in turn. This bishop is doing a fantastic job holding our kingside structure and making sure that black can't hit us back on the other wing of the board. We want to focus on our attack. So, stop counterplay and then just cleanly finish the game on the other wing. Not bishop takes d6, but knight e4, hitting the queen and bishop. And now it would be very easy to play a move like knight takes d6 because, hey, we've gotten rid of that strong bishop, but it is bishop of opposite color. This is winning, but more complicated than the game continuation. We want to go for this cleanliness, I would say. Knight c5. Taking away key squares. If bishop takes c5, mate. So rook d f8 was played in the game. Check. Bishop takes d6. And bishop c8 was played, but nothing doing here. Jay plays queen a5, and Shabalov had enough. So going forward, one more decade, we have made it all the way to the Marshall Chess Club 2024, and I wanted to showcase that Jay has played many openings throughout the years, and Tori, Kali systems, he played quite a lot, but what I noticed and what I recommend students to do when they're studying certain static type openings or certain pawn structures is to study a specialist who's won many games in it. And Jay definitely fits the bill as someone who's played the Trempowski and this particular line in the Nimzo Larsen, where you're trading off a bishop for the knight early to get the double pawns. So, how we could also get this position, and Jay has played this many times as well, only difference is the B pawn. So coming back, once we get this position with the double pawns, technical players like Jay are going to do a big emphasis here. Knights versus bishops. I don't want them to get rid of their double pawns, and I'm angling for an ending where I will have a good knight versus bad bishop. So trading off our bishop for the counterpart is typically something that we're looking for, as a pair of minor pieces are going to be better than a mismatch, and we're looking to create an ideal setup which we'll emphasize. So number one, I would, in a dream world, want a pawn on d5 for black that's isolated. Start with c4, go ahead, encourage them to try to play for d5. Now f5, looking to play bishop g7, so knight c3. We don't want our pawns doubled right back. Now we're going to start angling for our ideal setup. e3, g3, bishop g2. And what I want you to see is, say in a perfect world, black was able to somehow get d5 in. This is a dream position for the Trempowski or Nimzo player, as with all of these pieces being trained on a weakness, the pawn isn't going very far. So keep this in mind if you're ever playing this opening, that's exactly what we're going for. So castles, knight ge2, c6. We also castle. Rook e8. And we're back to another one of those static positions. Okay, we talked a little bit about what we want with the minor pieces. A move like knight f4 isn't going to cut it because it's not going anywhere. And maybe even g5 could encourage black in some variations to get the ball rolling on an attack on the kingside wing. So how can we make the most of our position? Well, we've got a light square bishop. Can we make it stronger in the long diagonal? How would we do that? We'd weaken up the pawn structure. So d4, d5 isn't going to do it, but b4 is. And now a6 would be met by a4 in a continuation of the idea. Bishop e6 was played in the game. And this is one of the only light inaccuracies. I'd like to see b5 here as a continuation of the plan. And then, say for instance, bishop takes c4, b takes c6, where we're getting that dream position that we were looking for, and white should be doing quite well here. But d3 was played. We're not ruining anything. If you're not sure, play the solid move and then continue with your plan. Black plays d5, but has set himself up definitely to capture back with pieces. And that's avoiding that isolated pawn is critical for black. I'd again like to see b5 to try to mix it up, but Jay just goes directly for this ending, which is knight versus bishop. And by machine standards, it's got zeros. So let's see the slow, steady finesse like we saw in the first two games by Jay. We're going to continue with our plan of playing where we're stronger, and we've got a minority attack style break coming on the queen side. We've got the A and B pawns, the 2 playing against the 3, looking for that b5 break. a5 is played. So a good pausing point if you play these types of positions. How can we get the most out of our position? Well, taking is going to create a concrete weakness on a4. Pushing looks to give away a pawn, so increase the tension. And after takes, you've in the very least defended this pawn twice and put the rook on a more aggressive file, looking to potentially double up quite quickly to increase the pressure. Because if I've got to give away the A pawn, I'd like to get a healthier pawn, say the knight pawn, the B pawn, in return. So rook a7 to defend. We'll start improving our pieces, shall we? Knight f4, hitting the queen. Now d4, shutting the eye of the bishop, holding back the pawn structure. You said, wait, so don't put pawns on the same color as the bishop. Well, how can black pressure us here? Bishop f8. Can't do anything about the pawn, so got to reroute the bishop. Where's the best square for the rook? Rook b6. Fix the weakness. Now after c5, takes, and likely takes here is the best way to go. And we get this type of looking to undermine the bishop idea going on at some point. And this is a balanced game where you're very likely to continue to press, as this bishop can't do much. White's definitely preferable in this zeros type position. But rook d8 was played, and after takes, c6, takes. And don't give away that last pawn. Oh, slow, steady improvements again. a5, a6. Bishop e5 is going to be the last best chance for black in this position. After bishop takes f4, even though we also have double pawns, our passer is protected. And if you ever want a textbook example of good rook versus bad rook, this is it. The rook behind the pawn, supporting the push of the pawn, every rook wants to be behind the pawn. The further it pushes, the rook that is defending in front of it gets fewer squares, where we have more squares as options. So good rook versus bad rook. Now black is doing the right thing, getting behind this pawn. How do we improve? Well, if this king could reach c4, should be pretty easy to get rid of this pawn. So king f1. And black is trying to do the same thing, rushing the king. And then it's already a bit too late because black's king can't come in to assist like white's king can. Check. Blockade. Now that it's not going anywhere, I do like the move rook a4. Say, for instance, rook c8 to waste time. You just take the pawn. I don't see a way that we can do much about that. But rook d1 was played, forcing the king one move further away from the action for later to do the same kind of idea with rook d4, which likely this is better technique as you're getting just that much more out of the position, which you see from great players. Rook a8 takes. Now, what is the optimal way to handle this? Jay puts on a nice squeeze by going rook c to c6, but I think maybe we can play rook b7 and get rid of a rook and handle the position this way. And this is likely going to be a little bit faster than the main game, but still a showcase in technique as we have all day. Black's rooks are paralyzed, so we can just improve without any worry. Rook b7, a7, dances all the way to the finish line here. You can have that rook if you wanted it, as we've got the strong rook d8 tactical deflection where we're going to take in queen, and after rook d2, king e5. White had enough, and we've gone through 4 decades of excellence by Jay. Hopefully you enjoyed these games. If you did, like and subscribe. Hit that little bell notification so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Thanks for joining us.